another municipality serve as the holder of funds, but that became complicated, and we just could not get through the bureaucracy in order to get that done. When we were talking about changing the legislation or making some changes to it, we approached Office of Policy and Management and indicated to them that, if they were to apply for the funds, that the funds would more likely be approved because they have the resources to manage it, to be the fiscal agent and to manage it. And we had that available. That the request is still there. The draft of the proposal is there. In fact, I actually sent it over to OPM for their review and say, here's the model, and this can be used. So the idea that the funding is not available, that's not accurate. The federal funds are there, and I have spoken with the feds. They've indicated, yes, that's one of the things that the federal government is not going to reduce, that it's there and it's available through the Department of Transportation. So that is possible. Your second question regarding the filing complaints. Individuals can file a complaint to the police department, and once those complaints are addressed, we're supposed to get a copy of it so that we can review it and submit that into the legislature and to the governor's office as here are the reports. Again, we have not received many of those reports, and I know there are complaints that are being made. Like I said, I have something just this past week. I've received a complaint from a citizen who kept copies of it and has forwarded to my office and to me. And this is new information. Has not come to my attention through that particular through the channels that they're supposed to come through. That is through the police department.
Margaret Young, I just have a question about the way the original legislation and the implementation process and how it ended up, given it's protecting the entire citizenry of the state in the African American affairs area. And if, in fact, the Office of Policy and Management has both the staff and the resources, and it's supposed to be a statewide initiative, do you have a point of view as to who should be overseeing the execution of this to make it get done? That's to all three panelists.
Well, in the beginning, when the law first came about, it was supposed to be handled by the Chief State's Attorney's Office. That's where it laid. And apparently it was not working. I'm not sure. I wasn't here at the time. But it was then shifted over to the commission. Maybe it's because Alvin Penn was African American. Not sure. Had to be addressed somehow. It wasn't working, so it was pushed on to the commission with really not enough resources, not enough funding. I think as we talked about the new legislation that OPM, the other part of it is that we didn't have a hammer to enforce it through the commission. The best we could do was report back to the legislature that that's not happening, or they were not getting reports or that kind of thing. But we had no power to implement it or make sure that departments were submitting reports. However, when we looked at addressing this issue, it was felt that through the OPM that if a department or a municipality was not doing what they're supposed to do, funds could be withheld, and that might be the hammer that would be required. But we don't. The commission did not have that power.
I just wanted to respond briefly to what was just asked and actually the question before. So the question before about funding, during the debate, I guess, during the session, one of the major reasons that we talked about funding wasn't this aspect of it, which I think is the important aspect about funding, but it was about whether or not police cruisers would need printers and all kinds of other equipment in order to do what was necessary with giving a copy of the report to individuals who were stopped. And the question I actually had was, I thought there was some technology developed a few years back called carbon paper or something similar that would take care of that. So, the opposition that had been raised, because it's not really, to my mind, it's not really the purview of police departments to worry about what happens once it goes into our bureaucratic morass here. It's whether or not they can do their job and whether or not we're affecting it, and that is having to do with having to give over the extra copy. So I think we have a solution for that, and it gets to the point that you alluded to that I had made earlier about whether or not opposition to this is genuine or not. Look, if you have an issue with something that's going on in this building, generally what you do is you sit down with people and you hammer it out. That did not happen here. So I have to say that if you bring up the issue of printers and all of these things, which I think are a non-issue, and you don't sit down, it says to me that the opposition is not really genuine. And I think that's important. As to who should be doing this, there were conversations with OPM. OPM indicated that they could help out, and I think, as Mr. Case has indicated, that they have more of a hammer, and I think it should probably be there. And to the point of whether or not this should have originally been where it was with the commission, I think, yes, we're trying to protect all of the citizens of the state, but if we're talking about racial profiling, we're talking about certain citizens of the state. And I think that's why you have it wind up where it is. And when we have these conversations sometimes, there are things that we don't want to say. Look, we're talking about an issue that affects every citizen in the state because of the relationships created by the negative impact of doing what we do. But it directly impacts people who are black and brown in this state, and that's why it was imagined the way that it was.
If I can just take 1 minute, I don't have much to add to what Gary and Glenn have already said, but I think the appropriate place for monitoring and oversight would be some entity that has the sufficient amount of resources and the sufficient amount of staff in order to do that job. I have the utmost respect for the African American Affairs Commission, but I think in terms of resources and staff, that was not the right place for this assignment to be. Certainly in terms of interest in the subject and genuine desire, they certainly qualify on that score. But in terms of resources and staff to devote to the mission, I think they were lacking through no fault of their own in that regard. There was also a constituency group that had advocated for the establishment of somewhat of an advisory committee that would have included some of the stakeholders in this issue, including community representatives. And I suppose I would be supportive of that sort of an approach to work along with, whether it be OPM or some other agency that is charged with the primary responsibility for receiving the data and monitoring the data.
I have questions.